Hi everyone, we are Johnny and Roberta from Synchronicity Center for Modern Mindfulness and Awakening, and we'd like to welcome you to episode 10 of Introduction to Practical Buddhism and Mindfulness Meditation. Welcome back. This series is intended to give you an easy to understand overview of core Buddhist philosophy and provide you with simple tools to apply it to daily modern life.
Yes. So today we are going to introduce you to the abstract Buddhist concepts of emptiness and not self. Now these tend to be a bit more difficult concepts to understand coming from a Western mindset, as the terms themselves don't usually conjure up relative meanings in the Buddhist sense. So we hope to give you some clear and concise explanations and relatable examples to help you understand it better.
And as always, please reach out to us if you have any questions at all about anything we've already discussed in the past, as well as anything we end up talking about in this episode, which is pretty deep. And also, as a reminder, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media, and you can always catch up on previous episodes that you may have missed. So let's get started.
Awesome. Okay, so we've talked a lot throughout this series so far about how one of the main practices of Buddhism entails experiencing the true nature of reality, especially that all things are interdependent and all things are impermanent. We also introduced you to the beginning of understanding and acknowledging what the Buddha described as the three marks of existence, which are impermanence, suffering, and not self.
So let's begin to dive in and explain what these concepts of not self and emptiness really mean. In order to properly understand not self, it is helpful to first explain the concept of emptiness. And this can historically be a very difficult concept to grasp. So we will first put it in the simplest terms we can.
Okay, so to begin doing that, it truly begins with the basic understanding that all things, and I mean absolutely everything, is empty of meaning until our human minds come along and assign meaning to them. In other words, things don't come with a meaning. They just are as they are. We are the actual givers of the meaning.
I mean, just imagine a world that had no people.
Mm-hmm.
There would be no one to give things meaning and no one to seek the meaning of things. So, just beginning to understand this is a step towards unlearning the way we see and interpret the world around us. And this is mainly due to our conditioning to see and label everything in our seeable and knowable reality from the moment we come into this world. We are taught that a tree is a tree, that a cat is a cat, that the color blue is called blue, and that our parents are mom and dad, and that we live in a structure called a house. And this extends to absolutely everything.
Absolutely. So, one thing to consider for a moment is something like language. Words are probably one of the greatest examples of emptiness. Every single word that you know in any language is truly only just a combination of sounds, and it always has been. It was absolutely empty of meaning until at some point, someone, or maybe even a group of people, came along in the past and one day decided that that particular combination of sounds put together in that particular way would stand for a particular meaning. If meaning wasn't assigned to the sounds that we can make, they would just be that, sounds, or just gobbledygook, gibberish.
Right. Think if hearing other people speaking a foreign language that you don't understand. To you, the words are just put together sounds that don't make any sense.
Right.
They are empty of any meaning to you until you possibly one day learn that language or maybe even cheat and whip out your Google Translator app. I don't know.
Can't say I haven't done that before. But anyway, it's important to point out that this concept that all things are empty of inherent meaning does not mean that all things are meaningless. No. It just illustrates the importance of understanding that everything's meaning is assigned, namely by us, the givers or assignees of the meaning.
So now to dive in a bit deeper, if you recall, the truth of impermanence informs us that there are no permanent things at all. Everything arises, lingers, and passes away. So, despite our conditioning to place a label and meaning on everything, the reality is that there actually are no things. There are only processes or happenings in a reality that is in constant flux.
Now, of course, our human conditioning impels us to identify these processes as things for obvious practical reasons. However, it's critical for understanding these concepts on a deeper level that you train yourself, for example, that when you see a thing such as a tree, to also be able to see that tree with its interdependence and impermanence. To know that there really is no tree outside of your perception of it, that current snapshot of its existence in that very instance of time.
So just try to remember that in previous episodes we explained that a tree is made up of 100% non-tree elements, such as the sun, soil, nutrients, water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, etc. It was once a seed and is now growing in the form as a tree. And at the very same time, it is in the process of dying or passing away.
Exactly. And like in a movie of that tree, if we could speed up time, we could watch frame by frame and see that tree go from a seed in the ground to a sprout to a sapling to a big tree, and then a dying tree, then to possibly a fallen dead log, until it rots away and once again becomes part of the earth and all of the little things in between.
And this process is true for all things. Hence, all things can be considered empty of inherent meaning. Or in other words, things have no intrinsic meaning in and of themselves until our human minds perceive and assign it to them. And this brings us closer to the understanding of emptiness from a Buddhist perspective.
Exactly. And where this becomes important in Buddhist practice, and beginning to see reality as it is that in day-to-day situations, as things and events unfold, it's important for us to train ourselves not to automatically assign meanings to each and everything that happens. A key way to free ourselves from so much of the avoidable suffering that we cause ourselves in life is to learn to accept things, just seeing them as they are.
In the present moment.
Yeah.
And this is, once again, accomplished by not attaching meaning to them and creating or inventing those stories that we are just so good at habitually creating about what we think is happening. And the key is doing that even if that means accepting ultimately unknowable aspects about many situations.
Sometimes we just don't know, and that's okay. So this can obviously take a very big shift in perspective in the way we see things, along with the deviation from how we are normally used to operating in this world day to day, automatically, habitually. But the resulting effect of understanding and mindfully practicing this concept of emptiness can be immensely liberating.
It is at that point that you can begin to see things, people, and situations just as they are, without all the labels and preconceived notions. These labels and notions have been so ingrained in us that it's hard to stop automatically assigning them, along with all of the accompanying stories and baggage they each carry.
Some of that baggage is very heavy. Now, this concept of emptiness extends much deeper in Buddhist practice than just the idea that all things and situations have no inherent meaning. This extension also applies to our concept of the self and is the foundation of the Buddhist concept of not self. And now this is truly where the unlearning begins.
So to start, the Buddha teaches us methods to recognize what he refers to as not self. Now, many people are easily confused by this, assuming that he is saying that within us all there is no self. But in actuality, he never actually tells us that there is no self, but that the self we tend to think we are or know does not actually exist in any permanent or individual form, or is in other words also empty of inherent meaning and is also constantly changing.
So, one of the results of identifying with the self that we believe is completely permanent and separate is that it is actually one of the causes for much of our delusion, ignorance, and ill will, which are, as you may remember, all root causes to that avoidable self-inflicted suffering.
But the key to applying this knowledge is through deep investigation. We can discover that we neither possess or are any such self, especially one that merits these delusions, pain, and suffering that are associated with it.
It's true. So the first step in understanding the application of emptiness to not self is to first recognize, as we just mentioned, that from the time we are born, we are typically conditioned to maintain a very strong sense of self, separate from the world and all other people.
In fact, if you really think about it, the person you consider that you are, your name, etc., is really a made-up, agreed-upon reality that was impressed upon you by your parents when you were first born.
Just think about it. If your parents weren't there to name you when you were born, and the nurse and the birth certificate clerk there to record it, or in the city or state archives or official documentation, wherever they record it, you would not be who you think you are. Without these placed labels and assigned stories that we inherit from our birth parents when we are first born, we're really all just noisy little pink or brown wiggly things.
And then as we grow up, what we perceive as ourself develops as our egos, and we become more and more conditioned to see ourselves as separate individuals, and we function within our societies as this ego-driven self. We develop our own beliefs, opinions, and ideas that oftentimes we feel must be defended, justified, or explained to others. We often believe that the more that others agree with us, the truer our perspectives must be, and the more that all others must be wrong.
Absolutely. We develop these strong egos that make us feel and act as if we are at the center of the universe and all else exists for and revolves around us. And this has led to and reinforced the development of a culture based on competition with each other. We strive to satiate our desires, to be the best at everything, to accumulate money, material things, and power. All of the things that we think will bring us happiness. And many times it's unfortunately at the expense of others.
So let's begin to examine how what we think is ourself is not actually what we think it is. To start, here are some inquiry-type questions for us to consider for contemplation.
Okay, so we now remember, as we just revisited from our earlier episode on interdependence and impermanence, that if you haven't seen yet, you really need to go back and watch. But that all living things, everything, are made up of interdependent parts and labeled by the mind as whole objects. But consider this. At which point do we become or stop being that object?
And let's begin by looking at the often used example of a simple pen. As it is dissected and or reassembled, at which point does it become or stop being a pen. Think about that. And then extend that thinking to the self.
At which point do we become or stop being ourselves? Can you pinpoint which part of our physical bodies is the self? For example, if you were to get in a terrible car crash and lose one of your arms, would you still be you without that arm?
What about one of your legs? Are your legs what constitutes and makes you yourself? How about if you lost all of your limbs? Then would you still be you?
Okay, so maybe it's not an appendage that constitutes the self. Maybe it's more like inside of you, somewhere in your body somewhere.
All right, so what about in your heart? We feel many emotions and love in our heart. Is your heart where the self is?
Okay, well, maybe. But what if you had a heart attack? Or even a heart transplant? After the heart transplant, would you no longer be you? Would you automatically turn into the self of the heart donor? Okay, so maybe not.
All right then. So what about the brain?
Brain.
That must be where the self is, in the brain. I mean, that's what does all the thinking and has control of our body, right?
But wait. If you can be aware of and observe thoughts that occur in your brain, then there must be a self or something separate from your brain somewhere in order to be aware of them, right? And wait, what about if you were unconscious, comatose, or even just sleeping? Or what if you experienced a stroke, Alzheimer's, or suffered damage to a particular part of your brain? If your brain is experiencing or undergoing any of these states, would that mean that you are no longer you?
Think about this. What about the trillions of individual cells that make up our body and brain? How can you be a self when you are actually a great big mass of individual living beings that have total control over you? Even your brain is made of trillions of individual cells that for the most part communicate and think for themselves. Even without your awareness, they don't even need you.
Nope. Is there a self in there that actually has the ability to control the thoughts that pop into your brain? Okay, try this. In your next meditation, attempt to purposely stop all thoughts from occurring. Can you do it? No?
Then who is really in charge up there? Not you.
Nope.
Well, not you as a permanent, unchanging self that exists in your brain.
Okay. So now we've pretty much come to the conclusion that the self cannot be pinpointed in our physical bodies. But what about in your feelings and emotions? Is what constitutes you your feelings or emotions?
Well, no. Feelings and emotions are caused by biochemical reactions in the body. And those are in response to sensory input from the environment. These feelings and emotions may impel you to think and act in a certain way, but you also have the conscious ability and awareness to ignore those urges.
That's very true. Now, you can easily overcome any belief that you are your feelings and emotions. For example, when you recognize the feeling of anger arising in you, you can actually tell yourself, I am not angry. I am just experiencing the emotion of anger. Or even, I am not anger. The me is angry, or the ego is angry. And with this understanding, you can control or regain control of yourself and how you respond to whatever emotions that arise at any moment.
So, You are not your emotions, and you are under no obligation to react to emotions in a particular way at any given moment. You are never obligated to be the same person you were even a moment ago. By practicing mindful awareness, you are granting yourself that freedom.
It's beautiful. So going just a little bit deeper, down into like the 12-foot section of the pool, we will also find that this so-called self, which we could also refer to now as our ego, often materializes as a result of our cravings and aversions that enter our perceptual awareness.
This is important.
For example, when we begin to crave some spaghetti or something sweet, a new job, a new car even, etc., we become that self as we pursue the making of the spaghetti, the trip to the donut shop, the search for the new job, and the shopping for the new car.
Of course, we all know by now that we are conditioned to think that satisfying our cravings will make us happy. But alas, we now know that permanent happiness is forever elusive in the game of craving. Once again, craving is satisfied. A new craving soon begins to emerge, and a new you craves it.
And aversion works the same way. We think many times that we will be happy if we avoid all the things that make us unhappy.
Right.
So we develop a self that's persistently trying to avoid unhappy or difficult things. But as we only know too well now that sometimes these things are unavoidable, or at least at times really tough to avoid. And this aversion causes sometimes even greater unhappiness than the difficulties themselves do. And then our persistent aversion can even further fester and begin manifesting as feelings of anger or even ill will or hatred.
So, as far as craving and aversion goes, this ego-driven self literally operates on a hedonic treadmill of guaranteed unhappiness.
Who wants
Forever,
to do that?
forever pushing that great big ball of craving and aversion up the hill like Sisyphus, only to forever have it roll back down again, all in search of everlasting happiness.
So sad. So overall, the perspective of not-self that Buddhism espouses is like this. There is no permanent self that can be found in our human experience. The self is an ever-changing phenomena, constantly in flux, impermanent, and forever changing as a result of an endless web of interdependence, causes, and conditions.
And those causes and conditions can go as far back as the supposed Big Bang, the evolution of the species, the makeup of our own ancestral DNA, to your individual cultural background, geographical location, and religious preference, to the meal you ate a few days ago, and even what side of the bed you awoke from this morning. And then there's the ever-changing causes and conditions occurring in this very present moment. Sounds, sights, smells, tastes, temperature, thoughts, etc., etc.
The self, like everything else according to Buddhism, is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and empty of its own essence or inherent meaning. Ourselves, from moment to moment, are interdependent with and exist only because of every other thing going on. Hence, there really is no separation from us and all things.
Remember, just like in the tree we just talked about, ultimately the self is made up 100% of non-self elements.
So now, how do we take this new perspective and practically apply it to reduce our suffering? Well, just this understanding and acknowledgement allows you not to be beholden to the idea of any permanent, physical, and separate self.
You can embody the understanding that we are rather like everything else in our reality, constantly changing phenomena that are interdependent with everything else. Thus, there is no real separation between us and all things.
And this can more easily release us from the suffering caused by misinterpreting all things as being absolutely separate, which in turn makes things either desirable or fearful in their own right.
That view of things leads to attachments and craving, or aversion of the things we can never really have or can never really avoid.
Beginning to release ourselves from these attachments brings us just one step closer to living a life of peace, equanimity, and freedom from self-inflicted suffering.
So that about wraps up this episode explaining emptiness and not self. As we've mentioned throughout the series in Buddhism, it's one thing to have an intellectual understanding of these concepts, but in order to truly practice and embody them, you must strive to have an experiential understanding of them as well. And once again, this is achieved through meditative practice.
So, in order to help you all guide you along, we've recorded a contemplative style guided meditation entitled Journey into Emptiness. Actually, Johnny recorded it. It is meant to help give you a taste of this experiential understanding. And we'll post a video version of this meditation along with this episode under our guided meditation playlist, and we'll try to link it at the end of this video as well. And likewise, in our description of this video, we will post the links to that same recorded meditation on our Insight Timer as well. So do please check out those resources. They can be very helpful. Many people have reported just how wonderful they worked for them in understanding this.
And as always, we hope you learned something new, or even a slightly different perspective of something you may had already known. And keep an eye out for our upcoming episodes where we will be going deeper into explaining the concepts of karma, rebirth, and metta practice.
Anyway, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and check out our website where you can schedule private sessions as well as sign up for our newsletter to keep up to date with everything that we've got going on.
And while you're there, if you'd like to become a supporter of our organization and help us to create more content like this in the future, please make a small donation via PayPal. Anything will do. We'd like to send a huge thank you to, and much merit to, all of those who have contributed and continue to support what we are doing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. You guys are awesome. But for today, as always, we will leave you with our wishes for loving kindness or metta. May you all be well. May you all be happy. May you all be safe and free from suffering this day and every day.
Thank you.